Pathfinder 2nd Edition is a very fun game. I really love it, and it is currently my RPG system of choice. That being said, it definitely isn't a system without any flaws, and today I'd like to go over one of the largest flaws in the system, low-level play. At lower levels of the game has a number of flaws. Some of these are due to design compromises, and some of these are just due to what I suspect were outright errors. But one of the biggest flaws is just the way that monster scaling works. So the way the game works, damage scaling is very different at low levels. Monsters die much faster at low levels, as do player characters, and many character classes don't actually function correctly at low levels. Moreover, what spells are good at doing is very different at low levels than how it is at mid to high levels. Now, some of these things make sense. After all, low-level characters are very simple, and you wouldn't want your low-level combat, which is very simplistic, to drag on. However, as a result of this, and some other choices, the game doesn't really function correctly at low levels, which makes it less useful for teaching players the game, and can mislead players into thinking that the game functions in a very different way than it actually does. In today's video, I'm going to go over these issues and explain what causes them, what the math is that underlies these issues, and at the end, discuss how these issues might be addressed. The most important thing to understand is that monster strike damage increases linearly, but starts out at only 3 damage per strike for a level -1 monster. This increases all the way to 16 damage per strike for a level 5 monster. This means that at low levels, higher level monsters actually do exponentially more damage, much more than is the case at higher levels. Going from 3 to 6 damage is a 100% increase in 2 levels, from -1 to 1, but going from 16 to 20 damage, from levels 5 to 7, is only a 25% increase in damage in 2 monster levels. The end result of this is that over-leveled monsters deal massively more damage, while under-level monsters deal pitifully small amounts of damage. Monster hit points also start out very low, and then scale mostly linearly, resulting in monsters getting massively tougher over the first half dozen levels. Due to player character damage scaling up so sharply at 3rd and 4th level, this results in underlevel monsters being extremely frail at low levels. On this slide, you can see the building monster damage guidelines for various monsters at various levels. As you can see, the damage ends up scaling in a pretty linear fashion across most levels, although it actually is a little bit faster at low levels. As you can see, there are some +3 increases instead of +2 increases in the high damage, but it mostly levels out to about +2 damage per level. However, because it starts out so low, this results in the damage at low levels scaling up very fast. Perhaps the best way of looking at this is to look at what percentage of damage you're doing looking at like a player level -2 or player level +2 monster compared to an on-level monster at each level of play. So here we have a chart. On the left-hand side, we have the player level from level 1 to 20, and at the top you can see player level -4 to player level +4, which is the recommended range of monsters you'd be fighting. As you can see, at first level, a player level -2 monster is only doing about 50% of the damage per strike of an on-level monster. A monster that is only 1 level above the player is doing 150% of the damage of an on-level monster. And as you can see, a player level +4 monster is actually doing 267% of the damage per strike. And this is not even taking into account the differential in terms of your 2 hit. In reality, this is even going to be higher once we take that into account. So as you can see, the differences here are incredibly extreme at low levels. You can see under-level monsters are doing pitifully small levels of damage, illustrated in these blue cells, and then these over-level monsters are doing incredibly high damage, shown in these orange and red cells. At level 1, your PL +1 monster is doing 150% damage, whereas at level 10, a level +4 monster, which would be a level 14 monster at that point, is only doing 131% damage per strike. So you are looking at a very intense level of damage differential here. This can also be seen in this next graph, which is taking the data from the previous chart and putting it on a graph. And as you can see, at low levels, the spread between high level and under level monsters is very high. As you go on and get to higher and higher levels, this gets smaller and smaller, and these differences eventually become less than 20 plus and minus 25% by the high levels. So you're seeing a huge amount of difference at these low levels, and then much more compression at higher levels, which is why at low levels these overlevel monsters aren't hitting you so hard, whereas at higher levels they aren't quite as dangerous. Monster 2 hit scaling also looks linear, but it's worth remembering that player character defenses are also going up, so these aren't changing nearly as much as you'd think they would be when you're seeing these numbers going from 8 to 44. You can see this more easily on the next slide, where we look at the chances of a monster hitting. This is the number of hits per round you would expect if a monster is making 2 attacks per round against a martial level armor class wearing light or medium armor. So basically, this would be like a magus or a thaumaturge or a class like that. So on the left-hand side, we can again see the player character level, and again across the top, we're looking at player level -4 through player level +4 monsters. And as you can see, it actually does scale up a little bit, but not all that much. It's actually pretty constant. At low levels, you are actually hit a little bit less often. This is partially mitigating that extreme damage differential you're seeing. And then it scales up just a little bit. So at level 1, a on-level monster, a PL +0, will hit your character about 1.1 times per round. At higher levels, this tends to be more like 1.4 times per round. As you can see, this varies a little bit from about 1.25 to about 1.7 times per round, but it's generally in that realm. So you are getting hit a little bit less often at low levels. You can also see that when you're looking at these higher level monsters, they are hitting you significantly more often. These PL +4 monsters are hitting you 2.1 times per round at first level, whereas a PL -2 monster is hitting you 0.95 times per round. As you go up in level, this changes a little bit, and you can see obviously there are no PL -4 monsters at first level because monsters just don't go down that low. But you can see, generally speaking, a PL -4 monster is hitting you about 0.65 to 0.85 times per round, whereas a PL +4 monster is probably going to be hitting you about 2.3 to 2.75 times per round. And now note that this is actually counting a crit as 2 hits, so you are looking at taking a lot of damage from a PL +4 monster because they are often hitting you once and critting you once. Now, if we put all this together with the damage chart that we were looking at earlier, we can look at how much damage per round you would expect to take from a monster relative to your character level at each level of play. So again, we're looking at level 1 to 20 over on the left, and we're looking at player level -4 to player level +4 on the top. So when you look at this, you can see immediately that at level 1, a PL +3 monster is doing over 20 damage per round to your character. You know, your character who has about 18 to 22 hit points at this point. So you can see a PL +3 or PL +4 monster is just taking out a character on every one of their turns. A PL +4 monster might even take out 2 in some cases. Whereas your on-level monster is only doing about 6.6 damage per round, which means that even if you were fighting 4 of them, they would only down about 1 character per round. So you can see what this actually means is that a PL +3 monster is actually doing more damage than 4 PL +0 monsters. So you are looking at a massive damage difference. Now, if we go up in level, you can see this difference is actually much, much less. Like at level 10, an on-level monster is doing about 44 damage per round, whereas that PL +4 monster is doing about 93 damage per round. Now this means that 4 PL +0 monsters are actually doing close to twice as much damage as a PL +4 monster per round. And that PL +4 monster doing 93 damage is probably not even downing a single character, even if they focus all their attacks on them. So suddenly you can see why it is that these overlevel monsters become less scary as you go up in level, and conversely why they are so terrifying at low levels, because they can just take you out at these lower character levels very, very fast. You can also kind of see that despite this, the damage is actually surprisingly linear if you just graph it out. You're just looking at your damage seemingly going up more or less steadily, so it looks like everything is fine, but it really isn't, because you just are getting taken out so fast at these lower levels due to your lower hit point totals. Doing a comparison of the damage dealt by overlevel and underlevel monsters relative to on-level monsters is very instructive, as you can see from this chart. So as you can see, a level 1 character is taking 500% of the damage from a PL plus 4 monster per round that they would from a PL plus 0 monster per round. And meanwhile, if you look at that PL minus 2 monster, they're taking 43% of the damage. Now, what this means is that these overlevel monsters at these low levels are doing insane amounts of damage, just 500%. That means these overlevel monsters are doing more damage than 4 on-level monsters put together, and they're harder to kill, and they don't lose attacks as they lose hit points. This is what makes these overlevel monsters feel so overwhelming at low levels. As you can see, that is extremely high compared to how it is at higher levels. As you go down this chart, you can see we're going from 500% to only 360% in just one level to 300%. And then it's down to 200%. So this PL plus 4 monster starts out as this complete beast that just wrecks you. And then as you go up in level, they no longer can just cream you that way. They're only doing about twice as much damage as an on-level monster. Meanwhile, if you look over on the far left-hand side of the graph, you can see the PL minus 4 monsters start out doing pitifully small damage. At third level, you're only taking about 15% of the damage from a PL minus 4 monster that you are from an on-level monster. And so as you can see, these significantly below level monsters are doing very, very little damage to you. Now, as you go up in level, you can also see that this progressively gets higher, and it gets closer to the amount of damage that a on-level monster is doing. So at level 3, you're only looking at about 15% from a under-level monster by 4 levels. But at level 8, that under-level monster is now doing about 30%. And in the long term, this equilibrates around 40%. Likewise, the level minus 3 creature is doing only about 20% starting out, but that then goes up to 30%, and then 40%, and eventually it's about half the damage of an on-level monster. So as you can see, these under-level monsters start out as being a very insignificant threat once you go below -1 or -2 at the lower levels, but then as you go up in level, these start to become more and more significant. And this explains the way that the encounter building guidelines are laid out. 16 level -4 monsters are supposed to be equivalent to 4 on-level monsters or 1 level plus 4 monster. And if you look at this chart, you can see that that's just not true at lower levels. At lower levels, that overlevel monster is way more dangerous, whereas those underlevel monsters are pretty pathetic. Here's a graph showing the same data. Again, you can see it starts out at over 500% at low levels for that PL plus 4 monster, and then eventually it ends up under 200%. So you can see that at these low levels, there's this huge deviation, whereas around level 6 to 7, you start to see it getting all way more like it is in the long run, and things start to level out. This leads to a very misleading impression at low levels because these over-level monsters are complete monsters. And so people think that, oh, at level 10, this is going to be terrifying, but actually it's not nearly as bad. In fact, relative damage more or less stabilizes at level 8, as you can see here. It does change a little bit after that point, but around that point, you're looking at it getting pretty reasonable. Now, all of this is leading to a lot of problems. Overlevel monsters are disproportionately powerful at low levels, making them into incredible damage machines that can down a character in a single round, and some kinds can just straight up kill them with a critical hit. Underlevel monsters, on the other hand, are obviously disproportionately weak. A PL minus 2 monster does proportionate damage equal to a PL minus 4 monster at level 18. That is to say, at level 1, the PL minus 2 monster is doing the same percentage of damage relative to an on-level monster as an underlevel minus 4 monster does at level 18. This leads players and GMs alike to believe that overlevel monsters are incredibly overpowered, where underlevel monsters are very weak. And this is just not true at higher levels of the game. Hit point scaling on lower level monsters is also interesting. If you look at the chart of average hit points for monsters according to the Building Monsters guidelines, HP scaling is actually purely linear at levels 5 to 20. You have plus 25 hit points per level for high, 20 hit points per level for moderate, and 15 hit points per level for low. But of course, this wouldn't work if you extrapolated this back to 0, right? You'd end up with monsters with 0 or negative amounts of hit points. So it obviously has to deviate. It also has to deviate because low-level characters deal so little damage. The damage upgrade characters get from striking runes, and the upgrade damage from rank 2 and rank 3 spells is absolutely enormous. What this means is that as you go up in level, monsters actually do take more hits to kill. At level 1, a PL plus 0 monster takes only about 2 hits to kill, a little bit more than 2 hits from a standard fighter using a Guisarm polearm, which is 1d10 plus 4 damage. But as you go up in level, you can see that the number of hits required increases quite a bit, and then it kind of levels off. This is actually in spite of the fact that the fighter's damage will scale up as you go up in level. This is actually taking that into account. Note that the damage percentage on this chart is a percentage of the damage dealt by a single strike, that is to say a single hit, from a Guisarm fighter at that level. So from the lower levels, you can see that you got like 200%, 300%, 400%, 500%, which equates to 2, 3, 4, or 5 strikes. And then you see up to like 600%, and then it kind of sort of stabilizes after that point. It starts getting up to the 700s and even the 800s at high levels, but it sort of stabilizes around that. If you look at the plus 4 level monster, however, is very interesting because you can see the lowest level is actually the level that these PL plus 4 monsters die the fastest, which makes sense because their hit points aren't super high. But as you can see, that quickly scales up, and after a few levels, you're up into about 1000%, which is to say about 10 hits. And this is pretty consistent across all the rest of the levels of the game. So what you're seeing then is these overlevel monsters actually aren't particularly harder to kill, and in some cases may actually be easier to kill at low levels. So you're getting into this sort of rocket tag sort of dealio, where you have these characters who are doing tons of damage, but also dying really quickly. And if you look at the underlevel monsters, you can again see the same story of the low levels. These monsters die really, really fast. As you go up in level, they are leveling out. So as you can see, these on level and below level monsters actually take relatively consistent levels of hits, although as it turns out, because of their lower AC, it does in fact scale more than you'd think. And then as you go up to these lower level monsters, their hit points aren't actually scaling up that much faster. So the number of hits is actually not that much greater on a PL plus 4 monster than it is on an equal level monster once you get to the mid levels of like level 9, level 10. Now, this has some interactions with the armor class scaling, and armor class actually scales very differently from everything else. It is incredibly consistent, and you always have the 3 categories. Extreme AC is always plus 3 above high, high AC is always plus 1 above moderate, and moderate is always plus 2 above low. Now, when you look at this, you actually see that your 2 hit chance is, as you might expect, actually pretty much static over time. But even this is a little bit misleading. If you look up towards the top of the chart, you can see that your odds of hitting an underlevel monster actually do go up a little bit over time. This is because those level -1 and level 0 monsters do not have as low of armor class as you would expect from an underlevel creature, whereas the overlevel monsters do actually end up pretty static in terms of how hard they are to hit. This makes sense because your underlevel monsters at the low levels do actually have slightly wonky AC scaling, as you can see from the previous chart, but this is interesting because mostly your 2 hit chance is actually static, which means that you're going to end up with these pretty consistent numbers of hits and misses against monsters. Here's a graph illustrating the 2 hit chance. Now this is for a standard martial rather than a fighter, but as you can see, it's pretty much the same across levels. Your PL plus 4 monster takes about 15 to hit, assuming no other bonuses. A on-level monster is going to be taking about a 9 to hit, variable between 8 and 10 depending on level. And then your level -4 monster will, after level 5 or so, take somewhere between a 2 and a 4 to hit. And this is all pretty consistent, as you can see. This is actually the case for fighters as well. They just have slightly boosted base accuracy. So as you can see, all their chart is just a little bit nicer. They have a little bit better chance to hit. And if you go to their graph, this is exactly the same story. They just are a little bit better in terms of hitting. When you look at the intersection between those hit point totals and those 2 hit numbers, we can see that the time to kill increases from low levels for weaker monsters. Level 1, you can see actually the time to kill is the lowest it is at any level in the game, and you really are playing way more like Rocket Tag. But as you go up in level, the number of rounds it would take of making 2 non-agile strikes per round to kill a monster assuming a Guisarm fighter to hit and damage versus high monster AC, you can see that over time, your lower level monsters, these PL-4 to PL+0 monsters, they're taking significantly more hits over time to kill. So at level 1, your PL+0 monster is taking about a round and a half of actions to kill. A PL-2 monster is taking half a round to kill, which is to say you're probably killing them in a single strike. And when you're all the way up to level 3, that PL-4 creature is taking less than half of a turn to kill. But as you can see, this is all scaling upwards on the lower end of the chart. So these PL+0, PL-1, PL-2. As you go up in level, you are taking more actions to kill these people. It's going to take you multiple rounds of attacks to kill a single monster. And by level 8, this kind of reaches about where it ends up at about 5 rounds of player actions making 2 strikes to kill them. Now, in reality, it's going to be less than this because this is not taking into account things like reactions, things like your spellcaster hurting multiple enemies in the same round, anything like that. This is just looking at pure meathead, no reaction, attacking twice per round with a non-agile weapon. But you can kind of get the picture here, where monsters are living longer as you go up in level, and then it kind of just stabilizes after a certain point. This is actually true for giant barbarians as well, as we will see shortly. But if we look at this next slide here on the time to kill increases from low levels for weaker monsters, you can see that the top part of the chart is actually fairly consistent, but these lower level creatures are in fact trending upwards, and they just kind of end up at a slightly higher level, which just means greater monster durability over time. This is also true of the giant barbarian. Even though their damage scales at a higher rate than the fighter does, they will still see that same upward trend of taking more actions to kill the monsters. It's actually slightly interesting because they actually will kill the underlevel monsters a little bit faster than the fighters will, and they will kill the overlevel monsters a little slower. As you can see when we go on this next graph, it takes them up to 22 rounds to kill an overlevel monster versus like 20 is the max for a fighter. In reality, of course, it's not really taking that many rounds. Obviously, you have 4 characters in a party, so any of these numbers would be divided by 4 at the very least. And in reality, there are ways of dealing more damage than this. But all of this has a very important consequence, which is that weak monsters die faster at low levels. This is the most noticeable thing about low level combat, other than the fact that you are dying faster, is that the enemies die faster too. The number of rounds it takes to kill a monster is lowest at level 1 across the board, and it goes up over time in all categories, but it goes up way more for PL+1 and below monsters. PL+1 monster takes like 2 to 3 martial character turns to kill at level 1, but it takes more like 6 to 8 at higher levels. At PL+0 is going to be taking like 2 martial turns to kill at level 1, but takes 4 to 5 at higher levels. PL-1 and PL-2 monsters will often go down in just 1 to 2 strikes at low levels, but at high levels, the PL-4 monsters might take 2 martials concentrating on them to down them, and they won't even die consistently even if you do that. So this kind of illustrates how monster scaling is going to change the game in a very fundamental sort of way. This leads to things changing wildly from the low levels to the mid to high levels. And you really see by level 6, you see PL-1 to PL+1 monsters reach their approximate long-term equilibrium state, but it actually takes until level 11 for significantly below level monsters to reach their long-term equilibrium. So this causes changes as you go up in level. So at the low levels, your underlevel monsters are very, very weak. By level 6, you're looking at the monsters around your level range and a little bit lower are going to reach approximately their long-term state, whereas you in a 1 through 10 campaign will never actually even see the final state of those really underlevel monster encounters that you'll see for the second half of the game. So at level 1, a fighter might dispatch a PL-2 monster in 1 hit and a PL-1 monster in 1 crit, meaning a stray reactive strike can completely eliminate a monster right off the bat. Whereas at level 10, a PL-2 monster might well take 5 to 6 hits to take down. This has a very significant impact on what low-level play rewards versus higher level play. Low level play rewards offense over defense and debuffing. Why would you raise a shield when your map -5 attack has a good chance of killing an enemy? Why spend 2 actions debuffing an enemy when you can just kill it? Why even debuff an enemy at all when it isn't even going to survive the round? The answer is, of course, that you actually often shouldn't at low levels against low level monsters. As monster hit point totals climb, debuffs and defensive actions become more important and more valuable because the monsters are actually going to have turns and you can't just kill them in one round. Compounding all of the aforementioned problems, there are very limited tank and reaction options at low levels. At level 1, only 4 classes have built-in reactions that help them control space or protect their allies. The Fighter's Reactive Strike, the Champion's Myriad Champion Reactions, the Guardian's Intercept Strike, and the Thaumaturge's Weapon Implement Reaction. The Monk, which is generally a tank class, doesn't get a reaction until level 4, and the Swashbuckler and various off-tank classes don't actually get a reaction that helps control space until level 6. This can lead to weird party composition issues at low levels, and also makes the classes that get reactions at low levels, especially the Fighter and the Champion, disproportionately powerful due to most characters lacking them completely. Getting an extra action per round, which is potentially a no multi-attack penalty strike, is really powerful, and gives these characters a huge edge at low levels. On the flip side of things, we see the opposite problem. Low-level spells leave a poor, misleading impression, because many low-level spells are just straight up bad. In old-school style games, low-level casters had very few spell slots, but the spell slots they had could totally wreck an encounter, with monstrously powerful spells like Sleep basically deleting a normal encounter or making a hard one much easier. These options don't exist in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, with good reason, but the first-rank spells are still mostly very mediocre, with a few exceptions. Now, one of the problems is that most first-rank damage spells are really bad, and this leaves a very misleading impression. Breathe Fire, for instance, the premier AoE damage spell, deals 2d6 damage in a 15-foot cone. However, if you remember from the previous slides, even a level -1 monster, a monster 2 levels below you, has 8 hit points, and they often have high reflex saves to boot at low levels. This means that it just won't kill any of these monsters many times, even if they fail their saves. And 7 damage to an on-level monster, a level 1 monster, will often not put it in range of being one-shot by a strike from a marshal, while 3 damage, which you're going to deal on a successful save in many cases, may not even result in reducing a 2-strike to a 1-strike reliably. Electric Arc is actually almost as good as Breathe Fire, and is often better for mopping up damaged enemies, and it's just a cantrip. Thunderstrike deals 1d12 plus 1d4 damage, which is about the same as a Fighter Strike, and Force Barrage is going to do about the same damage at 3d4 plus 3, but it's automatic. This can just kill a level -2 monster automatically, a level -1 creature, but it won't kill a PL-1, which is a level 0 monster at first level, and might not deal enough damage to set up a on-level monster to get one-shot by a strike, depending on the damage rules. These low-level spells are where the notion that spellcasters don't deal very good damage comes from. In reality, spellcasters actually deal significantly more damage than martial strikes, and this actually goes up to twice as much damage as a martial strike at mid to high levels. If you look at this, you can see that at rank 1, Breathe Fire is only dealing 2d6 damage, or about 7 damage on average. But at rank 2, Burning Rays is doing 4d6, which is 14 damage on average, and at rank 3, Fireball is dealing 6d6, or 21 damage on average. And in fact, there's also Thundering Dominance at rank 2, which isn't on this chart, which deals 4d8 damage, which is 18 damage on average. And as you can see, if you compare this over to the fighter damage, you're now suddenly seeing that the fighter is dealing more damage, 136% of the damage, with a strike, as your AoE spell is doing at level 1. But by level 5, you're looking at that same strike dealing only about 70% of the damage that your fireball does, except your fireball is hitting every enemy in the encounter. By level 11, you're now down to about doing 50% or so damage, and this actually continues through most of the high levels. As you can see, you're doing about twice as much damage with your max rank spell that is hitting multiple enemies as a fighter is doing against a single enemy. This really is not what the low levels set people up to believe, but as it turns out, casters actually are the highest damage units in the game, not martial characters. What ends up happening is that a lot of people learn the wrong lessons at low levels because they see these damage spells and they aren't really doing much, and they're like, oh, damage spells aren't very good. But once you get up to casting 4th, 5th, 6th rank spells, you're doing way more damage with these spells. They're just much more powerful. And this is why spells cost 2 actions to cast. They are doing way more than a single strike is, which is why they cost more actions. But at low levels, when you're doing less damage, and often your martial buddy is just one-shotting things, it makes it look like you don't really do much with your spells, and you need to be doing other things. But it turns out this is just the wrong lesson to learn, and it's just that low levels are weird. So what are some good spells at low levels? Well, Runic Weapon and Runic Body are really good. Runic Weapon and Runic Body are a huge damage boost at level 1, boosting your 1d10 or 1d12 weapon user's damage by plus 1d10 or plus 1d12, as well as adding another plus 1 to hit, a huge boost to their damage. A fighter who is normally dealing 1d10 plus 4 damage, dealing 2d10 plus 4 damage, may now one-shot level -1 monsters, and on crits will now reliably one-shot a on-level monster, whereas before their crits wouldn't kill them about half the time. A barbarian who normally deals 1d10 plus 10 or 1d12 plus 10 damage may now deal 21 or 23 damage on average, which is not only almost always going to kill those lower level monsters, but it will also one-shot a on-level monster and will shave off half the hit points of a level +2 monster, which would be a level 3 monster at first level, per swing. And a lucky critical hit might just straight up kill one. But there's a problem, and the problem is these spells teach you the wrong lesson. These spells seem to teach you that buff spells are super powerful, and they're what a caster should be doing. And this is completely wrong. These 2-action buffs at low levels are as good as buff spells ever actually get. These spells are boosting your damage often by 50% or more, and they're often pushing you into one-shotting enemy territory, or significantly reducing the number of strikes you need to land. At higher levels, while these 2-action buff spells are situationally useful, buff spells simply do not add this level of relative damage. You just can't increase your damage by 50% or more with a buff spell at higher levels, and they don't push you up over this important 1-shot and 2-shot thresholds anymore. You are no longer seeing these huge gains that you see at first level. Moreover, the extremely low level damage of casters at these low levels makes these buffs look much more appealing by comparison. I mean, oh, I'm buffing my buddy, now he's one-shotting all these enemies. Obviously, this is what I'm supposed to be doing as a caster, right? But as it turns out, this isn't actually how it works at any level other than the very lowest levels, so this just teaches people the wrong lesson. The potency of these spells at low levels misleads players into thinking that buffs are the primary and strongest way that casters interact in combat, whereas in reality, these spells are just unusually powerful at this level due to boosting your damage from 1 die to 2, and higher level damage spells are much stronger than buffs. Another weird aspect at low levels is summon spells. Because monster level doesn't go below -1, summon spells summon monsters much closer to level of PCs at low ranks. A rank 1 spell summons a level -1 monster, a rank 2 spell summons a level 0 monster, and a rank 3 spell summons a level 1 monster. These monsters have proportionally higher offense and defense and damage resistance than higher level monsters tend to, especially relative to PCs. A level -1 skeleton guard, for instance, has DR5 to slashing and piercing, and can actually be almost invincible to many low-level monsters depending on those damage types, and it deals almost as much damage as a level 1 monster, 1d6 plus 2 damage. Meanwhile, you look at something like a skunk or a giant skunk, their musk ability is actually stronger than your on-rank debuff spells, and the skunk bites will actually deal reasonable damage. A giant skunk's bite will only deal 1 less damage than a fighter using a one-handed reach weapon at level 3. So what you're looking at is these summons being really powerful in ways that they aren't at higher levels. They have more hit points relative to monsters, their defenses are higher, and so this makes them seem like a really powerful offensive tool, and is what leads to a lot of complaints as people go up in level, and now suddenly these summons that they were relying on aren't quite as powerful. That doesn't mean that summons aren't decent at higher levels. They actually are, and there's actually a number of pretty good summons, but they don't sport the same level of offensive powers, and at higher levels, their ability to absorb damage and otherwise provide utility is much, much more important. Another really big deal at low levels is the bad rank 1 focus spells. Focus spells are the bread and butter of casters, but many caster classes lack good focus spells at rank 1, or only have a few good focus spells, and the player may not choose them or may not know about them. Casters without focus spells that are good lack this powerful fallback option. They really, really extend how many spells you have that you can toss out. Casters with good focus spells have a big leg up at low levels as it greatly extends their power across the day. Characters with spells like Earth's Bile, Spray of Stars, and Tempest Surge start out with powerful options that they can dump out every encounter, potentially multiple times per encounter, without spending spell slots, many of which add on free debuffs. While on the other hand, many classes just don't get a good focus spell until rank 3 and often level 6. And moreover, at first level, because of how many focus spells scale, because they often scale according to that 2d6 damage per level, your first rank focus spells may well not deal that much damage at rank 1, again falling into that same issue with that spell scaling, and then when you get up to rank 2 at level 3, suddenly your spells are doing literally twice as much damage. All of this leads to one final fundamental issue. Class balance is just worse at level 1 than at any other point in the game. Some classes will one-shot monsters, sometimes when it isn't even their turn, while others will struggle to be consistently useful. Some casters will have a very limited number of spell slots and no useful focus spells, while others will have strong focus spells they will be using every round to win encounters, or healing spells that greatly mitigate low-level swinginess. Lack of player knowledge can make low-level casters even worse through poor spell selection and very suboptimal usage. This is the level at which you are starting out. People often don't know what they're doing, and so they will do things and they'll just feel ineffective because they are ineffective because they don't know how to play a character in the system yet, and casters are often harder to play than marshals are. Some characters also have reactions or an animal companion or eidolon, and basically get extra actions per turn, and other classes will get nothing to compensate them for not getting those features, leading to those characters seeming disproportionately powerful at low levels. And this is really the big problem. The low levels fail to teach the game properly. Low levels in TTRPGs are always designed to be simpler than higher levels to serve as a jumping in point for new players. Sometimes these are referred to as the training wheel levels. Level 1 to 2 in most tabletop RPGs are very simple by comparison to how the game functions later on. However, the purpose of these levels should be to introduce players into the system and teach them how it works, but Pathfinder 2e's low levels function fundamentally differently from mid to high level play. This is due to a combination of these mathematical issues, these weak low-level spells, and some deliberate design choices that were made in order to make the low levels play differently from higher levels to the detriment of the system and to new players. A lot of memes about Pathfinder 2nd Edition come from people playing at very low levels and incorrectly applying it to the game as a whole without realizing that most of the game doesn't function that way. There's a massive shift in how the game plays from level 1 to levels 6 to 7, after which things start to stabilize to a new normal, which is much more representative of the game for the next 15 levels. Casters become much stronger, and AoE damage spells deal massively more damage, eventually surpassing strikes around level 5 and never looking back. Underlevel enemies no longer die super quickly and deal meaningful damage. Overlevel enemies are no longer ungodly powerful, and most martial characters eventually get the ability to strike as a reaction by level 6, which mitigates a lot of the advantages that, say, fighters get at very low levels. Though it is worth noting that at mid to high levels, a few of the classes, including the Guardian, the Fighter, and the Champion, can get multiple reactions per round, which is actually a very significant boost for them. There's a concept in psychology called anchoring bias. Anchoring bias is where an initial impression of something can lead to a lasting impression, even if that initial impression was misleading or incorrect. These initial incorrect impressions about the game often lead people to maintain these incorrect views about how the game works, even in the face of contradictory evidence. The issues with low-level play are responsible for many of the controversies in the Pathfinder 2e community, where people say contradictory things about the game because they are often basing their experience off of the very start of when they were playing, and they aren't recognizing, oh, we're higher level now, things are different. So, can it be fixed? I think some of it can be fixed. For instance, better first rank spells, and to a lesser extent second rank spells, would definitely help casters starting out with the game. Experienced players may know what the good spells are, but a lot of new players won't, and they'll gravitate towards obvious spells like Breathe Fire, and then be very disappointed. If they made some of these more obvious options a little bit better, it would help them understand the game better. Adding more first rank spells could help with this, but it would still leave the trap of what if they don't pick them. I think that irradiating some of these bad low level damage spells to be decent would go a long way. I think also that giving the monk stand still and giving the swashbuckler reactive strike at first level would help give the game two more tank classes at first level, which could help with party diversity, and it would also buff these classes at low levels when they often struggle. As a GM, you can just start your game at higher levels, thus skipping the low levels entirely, but this does just avoid the problem instead of fixing it, and a lot of existing adventure paths do start at level 1, so this isn't necessarily an option for you. Other problems are really hard to address though. The low levels being extremely swingy and the monster math being weird is not correctable without significant changes to the system, as the on-level monsters actually do scale correctly at low levels, and scaling these values upwards would require adjusting every higher level monster in the game, as you would just be adjusting your scale upwards. Making sure every caster gets a good spell at first level via their focus spells would go a long way, but this would require massive amounts of errata or house-ruled restrictions on caster subclasses. And of course, casters having very limited numbers of spells at low levels is hard to correct in the system as is, without giving them a bunch of extra first rank spell slots that turn into higher rank spell slots as they level up, but this might lead to other balance issues. For instance, any class with heal or soothe would basically have healing font at first and second level, which might end up being a little weird. So what has your experience been with low level Pathfinder? Have you noticed these same issues in your games? Is there anything else about low level play differing from higher level play that you think I missed? I hope that this video helps to spawn a larger discussion in the community about these issues. It'd be great if we could help more people get on board with the core gameplay of this great game, and maybe correct some of the issues that low level play has, and help people understand the game better. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have a great day.